Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Motherless Brooklyn. What was it like being in this very kind of unique, it's such a New York unique story. So what was that like for you to step into that world?
Oh, such a special treat. I love New York. You know, I've grown up watching it in TV and films my whole life. And this really feels like a love letter to New York. It's got such a sweeping, epic movie feel to it. You know, I mean, it's the kind of film that you don't often see made anymore. And I think for me to be able to work with this phenomenal cast of actors, you know, really seasoned New York theater-based movie stars, was just such a challenge and a treat.
Yeah. We were just talking about hair. One of the things that I loved about this is the fashion and everything really brings you in. So what was your favorite kind of period element? Was it the music or the clothes or kind of the environment?
All of it. You know, I grew up listening to jazz. So for me to be able to do something where jazz is almost a character in the film was really, really special. You know, we have this amazing score by Daniel Pemberton. You know, Wynton Marsalis played the trumpet. Tom York, you know, wrote a song. So it's a really fascinating musical combination. And then, you know, the period is wonderful. I've never done anything in the 50s. And we had this amazing costume designer, Amy Roth, who really brought out all of the texture. You know, it's not just, so often I think when you see 50s movies, they have a gloss to them, you know, that 50s perfect, 50s housewife, everything's just so two-dimensional. And this movie really has so much texture to it. And I think, you know, and also brought out by the cinematography by Dick Pope. So, yeah, I mean, I loved the whole world, really. And I think, you know, when you're filming in New York City, you know, New York doesn't stop for you.
No, I'm from New York, actually. So,
right, so, you know, we had scenes in these iconic places like Washington Square Park, you know, and we're like, wow, we're doing a protest scene in Washington Square Park, oh, the nuances, you know, and then there's people like walking their dogs and like going to work, and they're like, get out of my way, you know, like something films here every other day, this is so annoying, you know, but that was refreshing, and it grounded us, I think, in these characters, because, you know, Edward wrote every character has these sort of rhythmic monologues when they're first introduced so often, and I think they have a real New York energy to them. So filming in the city kind of, you know, you couldn't get too sentimental with anything.
What was it that you related to most about your character?
Well, I love the fact that she straddles these different worlds. I think, you know, myself as a biracial Brit working in America and, you know, having a parent from South Africa and, you know, being from the UK, I love the fact that there were nuances to her. And I really appreciated the fact that she wasn't just, you know, your sort of carbon copy femme fatale, far from it. You know, she's educated, she has a law degree, she's an activist in her community, and she had all these layers to her that I think you so often you don't see in female characters from the 50s, and certainly not, you know, women of color in the 50s don't always get to be represented in that multi-dimensional way, certainly in cinema. So I related to that, and you know, I think the fact that she has this deep emotional journey was really satisfying for me as an actor.
Did you know much about the history of New York and the kind of era that it's based on in terms of Robert Moses and the development of the city before you signed on?
No, I knew nothing. Okay. So I met Edward Norton and he told me about The Power Broker and Robert Moses, you know, which is this epic book. And it was really fascinating for me to, you know, learn about the history and, you know, just how the structure of the city could have been very, very different. And certain things that are in the story that were actually true, you know, in terms of how the racism of the culture and certainly a few bullies at the top was really baked into the architecture of the city, you know, down to things like the buses being, you know, the bridges being lowered so that public buses couldn't make their way to the beaches, which meant, you know, people of ethnic minorities couldn't enjoy the beaches. But it was also a very sort of insidious way of keeping people out.
Yeah.
You know, and that was fascinating to me. And, you know, I guess everything's connected, you know, and understanding gentrification, which sounds like such a refined word.
Absolutely.
But it was very intentionally and aggressively done. And I think there's been repercussions from the birth of the projects and repercussions culturally ever since then. So yeah, it's a very tangled web, but it is fascinating.
What was your absolute favorite scene to film in this?
Oh, so many favorite scenes. I love the jazz bar scene. I think for me, you know, obviously having a natural love of jazz, and also we really had the music, you know, and those musicians, with the exception of Michael K. Williams, who was beautifully miming the trumpet as played by the legendary Wynton Marsalis. But the other musicians were real jazz. They were his proteges, really Wynton's proteges. So to be there, to have a very nuanced scene like that, which really doesn't have any words, but it's really about these characters connecting, was really special.
Great.